A few years ago, as I was continuing to archive many of the materials that you've kept through the decades, I ran across 3 logbooks. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I forgot about everything else and just dove into each one. So you kept real time a logbook on one for the Roadsters, one for the Datsun 240Z, one for the Datsun 510.
Yep.
So you have all 3 of them in there. But for 510 day 2024, I would love for you to share some of the information that you kept in the 510 logbook.
All right. Well, since it's 510 day, we'll go back to this logbook from ancient history and look through here and it'll give you an idea of the type of notes that I kept for each of the places that we went and what we did to the cars. So, for example, here it is February 16th, 1971, and this is our first test with our Trans-Am car. We're beginning this season, and we're running against Alfa Romeo and BMW in a brand new car that nobody's ever seen out there. You've got to understand that up to this point, the Trans-Am series in the 2.5 had been pretty much dominated by Alfa. So we're coming in completely cold, and without knowing anything at all about the cars, I thought it was important, just for my own knowledge as we were going through the season, to keep as much information on the cars as possible. So, for example, one of the first things I did is weigh the cars and weigh all the components. We had 4 grain scales. We didn't have electronic scales in those days, so I used grain scales and measured the weight on the 4 corners of the car.
And all that data is on the next page, I believe.
Yeah, well, you can see here the total was 1,149 pounds.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the next page.
And then the next page here, you can see
Look
what
at
happens.
This. Look at this.
So here's what the engine weighs and what the trans weighs, and a comparison of each of these components, so that as you go through the car and you weigh what the seats weigh, the fuel tank weighs, all these different parts, so that we could get the total and figure out where we could remove weight, add weight, and tune the chassis as best as we could. So as a comparison on that, we had different engines that we were running. At the beginning, we had to run 1,600 engines. Later, we ran 1,800 engines. But there was a penalty by running the 1,800 engines. Later, they added weight, and you used a little bit less fuel on the 1,600. So in determining the advantages on the race, you might be able to run longer in the race with a 1,600 than the 1,800. So that was something tactical to figure out, how to figure out which one's going to go faster.
And I just want to point out that writing, you wrote that 53 years ago. I can't get over this. I still can't
read it.
I still. Well, that's because you wrote it 53 years ago. We can't read your writing now.
It's really interesting here because I've got, for example, some notes on putting in on the roll bar in the car, because obviously we didn't have any engineering drawings from Nissan or anything with any dimensions, so everything had to be measured on the car to build it. And one of the things that I noticed here is that to run the racing tires on the 510, we had to clearance the rear fenders and move the fender well back so that the tires would clear when they would turn. And that was important because down on the other side of the panel was the roll bar where it came down. So there's a little note here, for example, it says, move fender wells rearward to clear the racing tires and wheels. So in building the car, everything had to be learned cold because these cars had never been raced before. And in building them, we had to figure out all of these little dimensions and figure out how to build them because nobody had ever had one. There was nothing else to go on. So we made that all up. And I have all my notes here on what I did, but believe me, all of this information is transferred from the crew that we had. We had really top guys in there. Mac Tilton was our crew chief on these cars, and I can't tell you how important it was.
Well, in fact, you have a couple of notes about what John Morton was doing with the brake pedals, right? And what Tilton was doing, right?
Yeah, I tried to keep notes here on what each of the guys suggested that we do in building the cars up.
So on the previous page, it said February 29th, the car's completely stripped.
Yeah.
And then here you have March 5th.
Yep. And here it shows that John Morton's completed all the pedal brackets and has developed, all the tooling for drilling all the rear suspension brackets. And then George, that's GEO, has 2 days in the right side rear fender openings.
And that's George Boskoff.
That's George Boskoff, who just was one of the primary fabricators for us. Just absolutely beautiful work. So all of this work here is just notes on what these guys did, whether it was John Knepp or Mac Tilton or John Morton or any of our guys, George Boskoff. Every one of these guys contributed so much, and just that was that collective information that went into the cars. So here's, for example, our first test session out at Willow Springs. Now the car is completed. It's the 26th of April. So from the time we got it up until this point, and then we go out to the track, and fortunately we had John Morton, who's probably one of the most consistent guys in the world, to drive it. So you can see starting out, we're running 147.9 laps, and by the time that we come in the sixth lap, he's down to 139. He's come down 10 seconds, steadily dropping it down each one. And comparing the maximum speed, the RPM engines, we're running 8,300 RPM max, in fourth gear, because we weren't using the 5 speeds at that time, because if you went to fifth, it was too tall a gear. So the comparison was, that we were trying to figure out, do we want to run a 4-speed or a 5-speed, and what are the advantages of each? And you can also tell here's what the oil temperature is at 220. And I'm surprised that the water temperature was only 170 at that time, because what we learned on the dyno later was if we started getting the oil temperature stayed pretty constant at 220, but if we cut the water cooling off and started raising the water temperature up, we gained, 3 or 4 horsepower. And so we ended up running the cars a lot hotter than we thought that the ideal temperature to run was 180. But actually, it turned out to be that we were running around 200 and we got more horsepower out of it.
Well, one thing I wanted to point out is you're also, during these tests, you're capturing the air pressure, 95% air pressure. Now, in the first log, you didn't have that information.
No.
So why did you start capturing that?
Well, obviously the amount of pressure that we're getting is determining what our final speeds are going to be with the car. So putting in some instrumentation, it just gave us more information. Because every time we'd go out, we'd end up with some questions. We'd ask ourselves, what can we do to make things better? And everybody contributed their own ideas on that,
But in 1969, your first year running the Datsuns,
Right.
at the championships with the Roadster, you found out how important it was to capture air pressure. What happened during that race?
Well, this is, in talking about air pressure, we're talking about the air pressure that happens regionally. And because we had been running in California, where the the consistency of the air is very, very constant, we tuned the engines for that particular combination of air and fuel. So when we went down to Daytona, we obviously qualified the cars 1 and 2 to run in the championship down there. And we went down there very, very confident that we were going to really win. And of course, the cars were 1-2 on the pole, and we were sitting right in the front, ready to win the race. And then overnight, we didn't at that time, we didn't keep track of air pressure. And the air pressure changed overnight and ended up so that we got more air pressure the next day, and the cars ran lean, and we blew both engines and didn't even finish the race. So we went in there thinking we were going to win, and there was one unknown that we didn't have because we didn't know what air pressure was. We'd always run in the western region. So from that point on, wherever we went in the United States, we always looked at the barometer to see what the air pressure was and how it changed. So those things are all sort of, common knowledge and tuning these days. But back then, very few people knew all that.
So that's one of the evolutions in the log, is that after that race, the air pressure starts showing up in your log.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So, you don't always learn by winning, you learn by losing as well. But that was a great loss. We would have won the national championship that year if we'd just known about barometric air pressure. So that is a similar thing. But here again, you can always see all the small things that we're doing, all the laps, 138.7, 138, how consistent John is running at these places and get down to the best lap, 137.3. So,
Now, is this your first test?
No, this is at the end of the race when we got there.
So you also have the first test session in here, which was at Willows.
Yeah.
With all of your data.
Yeah.
And then you have your second.
I think
it's after this.
Let's see here. We got. Let's see.
That's all the building of the car.
Yeah. And then we got.
And then the 29th of February, it's completely stripped.
We go back to 28th of. There we are.
There we are.
First test
So the
session.
first test session where we were talking about air pressure is at Willow Springs.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you did another test session.
Yeah.
At Riverside.
Right.
So I think that's the one you were looking at last.
Right, yeah. But here again, you can see how consistent he comes down, 147.9 by the sixth lap, 139. And it was just so good to have these guys on the team that could contribute so much. And that was a thing that made the team so successful, is that everybody contributed their own knowledge and ideas. And I tried to keep track of it as much as possible because it gave us an idea when we go to a new track how to set up the car. And, by understanding, we get a map of the particular track that we were going to run. And,
yeah, that's what I think is amazing as well, is you will have track maps in there with the RPM and the gear that the car is in as it goes around certain corners.
Here's, for example, this is the Elkhart Lake Nationals in June 13, 14, and 15. And I put down on the little map here, how we're laid out, not only what our RPMs are at different places on the track, there's places to eat, where to pit, what the speeds were, every little bit of information that we could use to make the weekend a lot easier for us, so we don't have to search around for everything. Let's see here. And golly, I mean, look at even little things like the specs on the weight. It's one thing that I went around always with a scale, weighing every component that we had, and we'd get a new piece, whether it was an aluminum wheel or a mag wheel, there's a slight difference in advantage in that. Today, I'd be out measuring all carbon fiber wheels. It might cost you $20,000 to put a set of carbon fiber wheels on the car, but you'd have maybe a 3 or 4 pound advantage at each corner, which incredibly improves your unsprung weight. So your acceleration, your braking is better, and your cornering is better as well. So always, go down to the local luggage store, get yourself a little scale that you weigh luggage with, and keep it in your pocket and weigh everything that you could see on the car that could possibly affect it, and see what everybody else is doing as well. Our first race was in Laconia, New Hampshire, and fortunately, we had the advantage of being able to call a local Datsun dealer in every place that we went and see if they'd accommodated. So we had a good garage space and a good place to work. So again, here keeping the names of the owner of the place and the general manager. And then, so if we went back next season, we had already good friends and a place to work, because if we were winning, we'd keep the cars in the shop, which created more traffic for people to come in who were interested in Datsuns and to see what was going on. But we also did simple things like, the places that we stayed in Manchester, for example. If we were staying at the Holiday Inn and the rate was $20 a night. Can you imagine at that time?
And then you also kept track, you always were conscious of marketing. So you also had the context for the press people also.
Absolutely. Find out, who the main newspaper was in that area. For example, the Boston Herald covered all of the racing clear up into New Hampshire. So it keep track there with Cameron Dewar with the Boston Herald Traveler and Jack Rada for the Union Leader. These guys were the people that told the world about who Datsun was, because that was my main job working for Mr. Katayama, was to let the world know what Datsun was. Because prior to that, especially in 2.5, where Alfa Romeo and BMW had run, nobody had ever heard of Datsun. And for them to come in with their little economy sedan and challenge these two top racing teams out of Europe was something really special. And the fact that Mr. Katayama gave us sort of free rein to do whatever we wanted in that regard, again, was part of the success of Datsun's sales. And it was really, really fun to do, because he wasn't hiring a professional PR outfit to go in front of us. We did all of this ourselves. And it was better because we had a direct contact with the press and made up our own headlines. And if we ran 3 cars later at the end, we were running 2 cars as a team, we'd always keep a third car for the team driver, who was the top guy locally. And that way the local press would write about it. So we had all kinds of extra guys that would drive for us, Even Bob Sharp, when we went to the East Coast, Bob Sharp was the top Datsun team on the East Coast, but at some places we'd have Bob come over and drive for us and be our guest driver. Same thing, we'd have Peter Gregg, top Porsche driver in the world at that time in the United States, was driving for us. And it was really so much fun to have these top guys come in and be our guest driver. And they were really, really good. But I'll tell you that it was tough to beat John Morton, because he was always really knew that car so well that you could put the top guys from any place in the guest cars, and all the cars were prepared equally. And John was always 1 or 2 tenths faster.
Well, and one thing we're looking at here is that you run a couple of races now, and yet you still don't stop testing. There's so many teams that go, oh, I'll test at the next race. That'll be my testing. And you guys never let your guard down. You came back from a couple of races and you went out and tested again.
Oh, absolutely. We're always trying new ideas. Everybody was contributing. So if we came up with some new tweaks on the engine, for example, new camshafts or change on the carburation, whatever we came up with, it was a new thing, we'd go back out to the track, and then we'd have these numbers to go back and look at and see if we really made an improvement. And of course, you had to keep track of all of the weather and everything, because you're looking at tenths of a second one way or another, or what the track temperature is, or what the tire temperature is. I didn't even begin to understand tire temperatures at that point until I got a little reader so that I could get the infrared, and I could cross across the tire and see what the temperature was across the tire, and that would tell us where to set the camber on the wheel, so that we had as maximum amount of tread on the track at all times. And it made a huge, huge difference when you combine all of these little details together. So, golly. You know, here, for example, we've got Mike Downs driving the 1600 with the 5.1 gear with the ultra close box, and John Morton's in the 1800. We just started running the 1800 511 with an ultra close box, and Bob Sharp in the 1600 with an ultra close box. So we could compare all three of these guys with the different engines and the different weights on the cars, and see what was the best way to go in terms not only of top speed, but the amount of fuel that we'd use, because we could probably go a lot farther with the 1600. And tire wear was greater on the 1800 because we had a weight penalty on them. So those are just some of the, you know, these little tiny things that we went, and it's so interesting to look back at these, this logbook here and see all of the final details that went into making the 510 such a great car. Some clue of what went on 510 day back then, because every time that we went out to the track, it was 510 day for us.